began. I mean, anywhere in the US, it would be difficult to find somebody who didn't have an influential personal opinion on Trump that might impact one way or the other how they felt or what they thought about the outcome of a criminal trial. That in Manhattan, in liberal New York, was even harder.
Senior features writer for the Sunday Times, who is based in the US. We'll be discussing the Trump trial, New York's troubles with legalised cannabis, and the latest with P. Diddy's sexual assault cases. And I'll also be asking, even though we care about it an awful lot, particularly here at Times Radio, do Americans care or even know about our general election? Megan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jane.
And happy Memorial Day to you in America.
I know, I have to say the office here and the streets outside it are very empty today.
Well, thank you so much for coming into the office and speaking to us this afternoon. We appreciate it.
No, not at all.
Let's start with the Trump trial, Megan. I know you, like me, have been able to think of nothing else for the last few weeks. It's been a blockbuster, this hush money trial, and it's now coming to a close. We're going to have the closing statements tomorrow from lawyers on both sides, and potentially we might have a verdict as early as Wednesday. Now, if found guilty, Trump would be the first former president ever to be convicted of a crime. But there are three potential outcomes here: that he could be found guilty, he could be found not guilty, or we could have a hung jury because all the jurors need to agree on a verdict. Is a hung jury actually likely?
Yes, because of exactly that. If there is one juror who either for, personal political reasons or just from their own judgment after the last 4-week trial decides that he is not guilty and disagrees with the rest, then there will be a mistrial and it'll be hung.
So what will that mean for what happens to Trump and things moving forward if it is a hung jury?
Well, trying to choose these 12 jurors in the first place in Manhattan sort of took up a huge amount of time before the trial even began. I mean, anywhere in the US, it would be difficult to find somebody who didn't have an influential personal opinion on Trump that might impact one way or the other how they felt or what they thought about the outcome of a criminal trial. That in Manhattan, in liberal New York, was even harder. So trying to do that all over again is going to be really difficult and unlikely before the election. In terms of how it would work for Trump, it would be massively convenient. Even the word mistrial seems shaky.
Sounds quite close to witch trial, which is what he's been saying the whole way through as well, doesn't it?
Totally. And I mean, I think it plays into a lot of these conspiratorial ways of seeing the judiciary and trials, right? Is that any way that it goes will be convenient politically to Trump. But yes, if it's hung, then there are lots of ways to spin that publicly.
Yeah, there was a New York Times piece I found really interesting this weekend talking about anger and retribution, whatever the outcome, talking about Trump's anger and retribution, whatever the outcome. Is that the feeling that no matter which way it goes, he's going to be lashing out at the people who've taken him to trial?
Totally. I mean, he has been itching to rant about all of the jury, and he has been almost literally gagged by his legal team on the steps of the court every day. He's desperate to go on about the people who sit on the jury and how they might unfairly send him to prison. So I'm guessing as soon as, in fact, we can make a very, very educated guess to the point to which we nearly know that he will stand on the steps of that courtroom and I suspect go on and on and on about the people who did or didn't convict him.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been interesting, I think, especially over the sort of the second half of the trial, how he brought people in with him who were almost like his proxies speaking on the steps of the courthouse because he was gagged, as you say. So he's sort of had other mouthpieces, but he's going to have his own mouthpiece back, isn't he, including Truth Social.
Exactly. I mean, it's such a funny mixture of just like the most remarkable, ginormous, politically significant trial of decades and this like really pedestrian day to day you know, like you go to those buildings and they're just really regular. When I first arrived in New York, it was right at the beginning of the trial. And I went to get my social security number and I was slightly disorientated, having literally just got off the plane, didn't quite know where I was. And I basically just walked into the bank of cameras and Trump fans and radio producers. And it is at the same time so everyday. And so undermining in the way that the courtroom's just like really so regular and dull, and then there's Trump coming in and out every day. It's really a jarring thing to see.
Yeah, as you say, if you were to write it as a Hollywood film, you wouldn't have the unprepossessing downtown Manhattan courthouse as your backdrop to the trial of, potentially the political trial of the century. But moving on, Megan, staying with New York, though, it's been 3 years since cannabis was legalized in New York, and yet there are very many unlicensed marijuana shops and not very many legal businesses. Can you just quickly explain how in New York State cannabis has been legalized, but then many of these shops aren't actually legal?
So there's been a huge crackdown on them over the last week or so, uh, mainly because it's so difficult to get a license in order to become a legal seller. And it's very expensive. So initially, this sort of illegal market established itself. Um, and then those shops weren't shut down, they weren't challenged, they were accepted largely by law enforcement as being legal entities. They obviously could sell cannabis for much less than the people who were spending tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars becoming licensed. And so what has actually happened is, rather than this utopia of fully regulated cannabis consumption and sales in New York, what we've actually ended up with is the sort of a thin layer of legal sales on the top, and then mostly illegal, unlicensed, and unregulated sales of cannabis in New York.
Why has New York made such a hash of it? No pun intended. When other states have done it so successfully in Washington and Colorado and California and other places.
It seems to have come down to its regulatory body essentially being quite sluggish and
Right.
slow on pushing things through. I mean, other states that have done well, like Washington, for example, licensed it very slowly. So they took 2 years between legalizing it in law and allowing for shops to sell cannabis. And so it sort of happened more slowly. They anticipated this underlayer of a black market and did everything that they could possibly to prevent it. Whereas it seems, and that has been the criticism certainly in New York and also in California, that politicians didn't really think that through before, or at least didn't do things to properly mitigate it. And so now we've ended up here, and they've got a huge amount to crack down on very quickly.
And do you think part of that is it shows a sort of failure of the sort of state government system in that way, rather than having a federal law change on this?
Yeah, and I also just think it comes down to what NYPD decide to focus on, which has been, since I've been living here, has been something that I found most remarkable comparison
Mm.
between here and the UK, is that there seems to be more patterns in what the police decide to criminalize at that point. And I think up until now, they've largely let it happen for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
And now they're, for probably more political reasons, they're gathering them together and doing these huge raids